Marty Zickert, and I'm a retired colonel in the Air Force. Spent 30 years, 5 months, and 28 days. I was born in Greenwood, Wisconsin. It's 956 people, no stoplights, and now no grocery store. And I was born many years ago and lived there until I was 20. And my cousin said, the Air Force has a program that if you have 2 years of college and you pass a series of tests, you could go to flight school and get a commission and all that stuff. And I went, well, cool, let's go take the test. I went on to Omaha to take the rest of the test and passed all of those. And then it was, don't call us, we'll call you. My recruiter said, son, if you just sign up, you'll never even finish basic training. They will know this is your intent. So I called him up and I said, how soon can I go? January 2nd, 1962, I'm in the Air Force.
They took the blue from the skies and the pretty girl's eyes and a touch of Old Glory's hue and gave it to the men who proudly wear the U.S. Air Force blue.
I finished all the basic training. They had 8 weeks of basic training at the time. At about that time, the baseball coach from Lackland put his arm around me and said, Marty, you can always be an officer in the Air Force, but you can't always play baseball for the Air Force. And being 21 years old and not a brain in my head, I went, sure. It turned out to be the best decision I ever made. It put me on a totally different career path than I would have been had I gone earlier. I would have been in the Military Airlift Command flying C-141s or something. We were the first class to go into Strategic Air Command flying KC-135 tankers.
Their KC-135 tankers are launching with them from their secure home bases.
So I got assigned to a base called K.I. Sawyer in Marquette, Michigan, Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And that started off my Air Force career. I was the only second lieutenant on the base. My wife came home one day from the Officers' Wives Club and said, we're going to Omaha. And I said, we've only been here 3 years. Average tour is 6. How do you know that? He says, well, John's wife told me. And John was a person that had a personnel. And I went, let's see, my wife knows before I do that I have an assignment.
The United States Air Force Strategic Air Command, SAC to most people. It's the nation's long-range combat strike force of intercontinental bombers and ballistic missiles. SAC's mission, to be ready, round the clock, to respond decisively to the orders of the national command authorities in relation to any strategic threat on the vital interests of the United States.
It was a reconnaissance group. They flew an airplane called an RC-135. It's KC-135, except it had bigger engines, 100,000 pounds of electronics inside of it. And our mission was to find enemy radars. And we did that by, you flew out of Omaha, you went to the North Pole, and then you ran at Russia, just like you were going to make an attack on Russia. And they would launch MiGs at you. When they first started, they didn't know what we were. They were used to another airplane, RB-47. They knew that. All of a sudden, we're brand new. And you're looking over there, and we had interpreters on board. So we're listening to these guys saying, it looks like a B-52, and we're out there going, no, it's not a B-52. And you can see them going through Jane's Book of Airplanes going, nope. And then finally they come up and said, it's some kind of like a tanker. And we're all going, yeah. So eventually they figured out what it was. That was an RC-135. And it became really entertaining. After you flew up there a number of times, you almost got to know them. And so we would be sitting there, and they're right off of our wing, and we get a Playboy magazine, run the centerfold out there. And you'd see their airplane tilt a little bit and come in. And I don't want to say we'd never be friends, but you were not enemies per se. flyers are flyers. We all have a brotherhood. I don't care if you're a Russian or you're an American. If you fly, you understand the other person. And one day we're out there flying, and we do our typical thing with a playmate. Guy goes, "Watch this. He's got Olga." And we're all going, yeah, yeah.
The USS Pueblo sailed from Sasebo, Japan on 11 January 1968. Its mission was to gather data on electronic installations along the east coast of Korea.
The Pueblo got picked up, and of course everybody knew what that was. That was the Navy ship that was a secured ship. We got sent in there the next day, and that's a long haul to get over to Korea from Omaha, a couple of refuelings. And we went in to do a recon of it and see if there was any activity, anything else, were there troops moving or any of that sort of thing. And that was probably the spiciest mission we had. It was because you didn't know. You know, our orders were when the Russians came up and flew with us, that was okay. If the Chinese, the Koreans, anybody else launched, you went home and you got out of there as fast as you could. And a KC-135 was really, it had no weapons or anything there. It was, you had 138. But you could turn, it would descend in a hurry. And your idea was go down and get low level. But it was, that one was exciting. That was, you just kind of sit there and you're going, you know, fear of the unknown, really. You didn't know what they were going to do, and you're at 35,000 feet, and you're, I kind of say, alone, unarmed, and unafraid. Well, 2 of the 3 is not bad. And it was an interesting mission. Nothing happened out of it. You know, they didn't do anything more. They took the ship Pueblo and off they went. So it was strictly a cat and mouse kind of thing. And I did that for 2 years, and then realized I was coming up for major, and I was never going to make major with 2 years of college. So I got out of the service, sort of, and I went to Memphis, and I was at Memphis State, and I flew with the Tennessee National Guard, which was flying C-124s, which flew at half the airspeed that I'd been used to flying at. And so it was a real change. It took us 50 hours of flying time to get to Vietnam. That was from like 68 to 71, which was some of the height of the war. And so we would take engines, the C-5 was brand new, and we would take engines to wherever they had broke down, because they were breaking down everywhere. I finally got my college degree, and I called MPC back and said, I graduate in soon, and I'd like to come back. And they said, we're not recalling anybody. Now, this was 1971, war still going strong. And I said, I'm a navigator. And they went, how soon can you come back? They were critically short of navigators. I started back as a navigator again in KC-135's tankers that I had originally started with in Michigan. And then an F-4 assignment came down. F-4 is a fighter. It's the primary fighter that the Air Force had for years, and it's the absolute love of my life. I flew it ended up flying for 20 years in it. I happened to be there in Thailand when the war ended, and they said, well, you are what you are. And I said, I'm an F-4 guy? Wow, how cool is this? Little did I know that my life was going to change dramatically from just flying airplanes, and I ended up in the Philippines, finishing up my tour in the Philippines. Went into the command post, ran the command post for a couple of years because we had gotten the nuclear requirement. We had airplanes sitting on alert with nuclear weapons, and they were going to head to China. They weren't going to come home, but they were going to China. And I showed up out of SAC, and they said, do you know all this red dot and blue dot and stuff? And I went, yeah. I should have said no, and I ended up in the command post. Everything that you did in the nuclear world was a 2-person control. If you were in a command post, There was you and an NCO, both of you were armed, each of you had a separate key to open it. And you would get a message from, they came out of national headquarters, and they were transferred through Hawaii to us, and you never knew. You don't know what the conditions are. You're just sitting there fat, dumb, and happy. And you would get a message, and you would open the safe, and it was a card that you broke. I had half the code, he had half the code. And you would put the code in, and that would determine if it was an exercise, if it was a real thing. A red dot was serious. That was, you're going to war kind of thing. So thank God we never got one of those. And then I ended up going to Shaw Air Force Base in South Carolina. And that was a non-flying job as well. I ended up doing one project as I was coming up for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. I did one project for a guy, and when the rating system came out, I was the only guy he knew. And I got this is the #1 major in 9th Air Force, promoted immediately, and I'm going, who? Can't be me. And all of a sudden I made Lieutenant Colonel. And now they said, now you got to go somewhere. You can't stay here. We had a family decision, and we picked Germany. We ended up in a little base called Spengalum, which is over by Luxembourg. There's 3 bases there, Spengalum, Hahn, and Bitburg. This was '81, and the wall's still up. And Ronald Reagan was president, and it was interesting. We sat nuclear alert there. They took us to Berlin. First thing they did is they took you to Berlin, and you got the opportunity to go through Checkpoint Charlie and go into Russia in uniform, full uniform. They were not allowed to talk to you. They were not allowed to harass you. They couldn't touch you or anything, but they would get that close to you, and they would comment to each other. Oh, he has a Distinguished Flying Cross. He has air medals. You just walk through there. And the idea behind the whole thing was they wanted to make sure that if that day ever come, you weren't going to have a problem hitting the pickle button and dropping a nuclear weapon on them. It was one where you realized exactly what communism was all about. People that went to Vietnam or didn't go to Vietnam, they spent their whole tour, a lot of Army guys, it was a 2-year tour. They spent it in Germany, and they always said, well, I'm not a Vietnam veteran. The real war was in Germany. That was the real concern. The Fulda Gap was where they were going to come through, and that's where all the Army was. And the Army's whole mission over there at that time was to give us 15 to 30 seconds to launch. That was their whole purpose in life, because you knew they were just going to get run over. So it was a lot of tension. The Russians were very, very good at running an exercise right up to the borderline and then backing off. They were very good at that sort of thing. And of course, they ran their Bear aircraft out there doing the same reconnaissance that we did, to launch. So you never really knew. Every time we'd be on alert. In the F4, we were only on alert for 2 days at a time. And we always had an exercise, and you never, ever knew. There was no guarantee it was not real. Because we sat there we had 5 airplanes on alert, all with nuclear weapons, and we all had a target. I loved working with the military. The bond you establish. I could joke with a guy about the Army, the Marines, the Navy, and give them all sorts of grief. They give me grief about the Air Force, but we're all one family. And that's what you get out of the Air Force. And you look at being part of something bigger than yourself. I know that if I ever need anything, I can call these guys, and they will do whatever they can to make it happen.